So the goal of the fellowship, as I see it, is really to provide a diverse experience. And it allows the emerging horticulturists an opportunity to develop their skills and discover their passions. And we talk about it being an immersive experience. And we do make a conscious effort to try to make sure that all the fellows are getting experience, at least a little bit of experience, in a number of different ways, a number of different things. So one of those things is volunteer management. So the picture that you see here is actually the installation of a garden out front of our entrance gate. And this was one of the fellow projects. So the fellow in this case is actually leading this group of volunteers throughout this project. There's a little bit of integrated pest management. We teach a little bit about silviculture and light conditions and manipulating the forest canopy. Dendrology, a lot of students, a lot of fellows come in here with a little bit of background in dendrology, but not a whole lot of real world experience. So one of my favorite games to play is, what is this tree? We have beehives. So most fellows choose to help with taking care of the bees, feeding them, checking for mites, collecting the honey, and so on and so forth. You will get a little bit of experience with plant propagation. So you see here some cutting propagation on the left. On the right is actually, these folks are pricking out tiny, tiny little seedlings from seed-grown native azaleas that we did. Depending on what is going on over the course of the 2 years, there may be opportunities to do some soil science. So with some of these projects, one of the first steps is actually to see what the soil is like in the project area. So they're taking samples, they're preparing samples, they're sending them off to be tested, and then they get the results back, and then can make decisions as far as what needs to happen to that soil before they can continue. There's a little bit of experience with plant records, mostly field records. So the horticulture staff of 3 is out in the field taking care of all the plants. And so if they find something that's dead, then that plant has to be recorded in a specific way. We keep track of what things have been planted, what things have been moved, what things have been removed. There's some basic woodworking that I think all fellows tend to get a little bit of experience with. Some equipment operations. So we do not own a little backhoe. This was the first time we actually rented a piece of equipment because we had some very large azaleas that had to go in the ground, and we were tired of digging that year. So we got this little backhoe and dug a couple of pretty big holes with it. See a picture on the right, some chainsaw experience. We do have a skid steer, a bobcat, that we train all of our fellows on. And again, a lot of this, there's not extensive training, there's not extensive use of them, but at least you get a taste of it. All of our fellows are asked to do tours. So usually the tours are Wednesday walkabouts. These are things that we do every Wednesday throughout the spring and throughout the fall. And it's very informal, 1 hour walk through the garden with a group of folks to just talk about whatever it is that we see that week that's interesting, that's new, what's going on in the garden. There's always a new mushroom or a bird or frogs and turtles. There's always something new every week. And the last thing I'll tell you about is the educational stipend. So I think one of the major perks of the fellowship is that in addition to the housing and the salary, you get an additional stipend for whatever you want, really. It's an educational stipend to pay for, if it's travel, books, programs, seminars, workshops, you go to conferences, whatever you think makes the most sense for you individually, that will benefit you in pursuit of a career. And of course, the fellows and I guess all of the horticulture staff are kind of immersed into this garden and working with these plants in our collection all year round. And our collections focus on 2 kind of broad categories. So there's the ericaceous collection, the heath family plants. So, pyrrhus, rhododendrons, azaleas, mountain laurels, and so on. And then the second broad category is just native species. So you see in this photograph, we see both azaleas and native plants. And so there's a wide range of native trees, shrubs, ferns, and wildflowers throughout the garden. So with that, I would like to introduce our most recent Hamilton Fellow, Nikki Aker. Nikki came to us this past spring from Purdue University and very highly recommended. Nikki was actually, out of a record number of applicants, Nikki was our top choice. So we're very happy that she was able to come and join us. One of the things that we really liked about Nikki was that we felt that she was really the perfect fit for the fellow project that we were hoping to assign to that fellow that was coming in. So again, we were really excited that she accepted our offer and that she has been with us. And she is going to take over now and tell you a little bit more about herself, sort of her journey to getting here, and a little bit about her project, what it is, and what we've done to this point. So let me stop sharing. All right.
All right, hello everybody. My screen should be shared. Let me just get to the beginning. All right. Well, thank you, Steve, for that lovely introduction. Today, my presentation is going to be about my background before arriving at Jenkins, and then what I've been up to since I got here, and really focusing on my project. But yeah, just a little bit about me. So I'm actually from Chesterton, Indiana. I feel like when I tell people that out here, they kind of look at me like I'm from some exotic place very far away, which is kind of funny. And I feel like the general impression is that I'm also very much from a place of only soybean and cornfields, which to a certain extent is true. But I did want to share a piece of where I came from, because the Indiana that I know is actually this picture here at the bottom. So if you look on this map I included, where I'm from in Chesterton is actually right at the bottom tip of Lake Michigan, one of the Great Lakes. And it has a really special and unique ecosystem along that whole stretch. So I grew up going to the beach all the time, which again is kind of funny coming from Indiana. Yeah, I grew up going to the beach and going on hikes with my friends and family there. And it was really influential when I was coming into high school. I ended up joining my horticulture club there and kind of caught the bug. And so when it came time for me to select where I was going to school, I ended up at Purdue University. So I went there and graduated this May with a degree in public horticulture and minors in urban forestry and botany. And while I was on campus, I got to do a lot of really different things. I worked in an apple grafting lab for a year, like really just grafting apples. That's all I did, but it was pretty fun. My urban forestry program was really great and really immersive, and I got to really get a lot of hands-on experience. I got to climb some trees, so I included a picture of that. But where I really spent most of my time at Purdue was at the Purdue Arboretum. So that was housed in our horticulture department. And with them, I actually TA'd for our woody landscape plants class for 2 years. And with that, I was leading plant tours around campus and helping students prepare for weekly ID quizzes. I worked really closely with our Let's Grow Native Purdue program, and that was an annual outreach campaign where we littered the campus with info signs on native plants and why they're important, and really just tried to bring that conversation to the forefront of our campus. The last project that I really worked on while I was at Purdue was kind of my baby. It was called Species Spotlight, and it was a series of interpretive signage that highlights one tree species on campus each month in a rotating display. And so I got to work on that in my senior year, and then hopefully they should actually be out on campus by this winter. So really exciting. But yeah, so that was my experience on campus at Purdue. But what I really valued the most about my time in school was my internships. So I actually got to intern for 2 summers while I was in school. My first one was at the Poly Hill Arboretum, which was in West Tisbury, Massachusetts on Martha's Vineyard. it's a really stunning place. It's a small garden, and it really did a fantastic job of blending their native meadows and other native herbaceous plants with their special collections of conifers, hollies, stewartia, which was my personal favorite, and rhododendrons and azaleas. Polly Hill actually reminded me a lot of Jenkins. It was a very small staff. There's only 2 horticulturists year round, and then there was additional summer help. But very small staff, so I was working, whole days in and out with the same people and wearing a lot of hats, doing a lot of different things around the garden, which I really enjoyed and was really influential when I was looking at coming to Jenkins. My second internship was almost a complete 180 from that experience. I went to Chicago Botanic Garden in Glencoe, Illinois, and there I worked in the English walled garden. And just to give you a sense of that shift, CBG has over 200 acres in cultivation. They easily have over 100 staff members through the summer. And so I never had to touch a mower while I was there. I never had to touch a leaf blower. What I was doing was very detail oriented. A lot of planting new installations, like this very lovely little butterfly up here. Also just doing a lot of arranging and raking out gravel paths for weddings and a lot more detail oriented things like that I also really enjoyed, but was just a very different experience. So after all of that, I ended up at Jenkins. I was really drawn to their commitment to using natives in the landscape and to sustainable horticulture, and also to sharing that message with the public. So shifting gears a little bit, welcome to the upper wildflower bed. This is actually my project site, and my project was a little unique when it comes to the fellowship because I knew what it was before arriving. Steve had mentioned it in the interview process and mentioning as restarting from scratch, a new completely native wildflower bed. And I was 100%, 110% on board. It was exactly what I was looking for, and I was really wanting to immerse myself in native plants coming out of school, and I wanted to really learn how to bring them together in a cohesive design. So looping back to more of the nitty-gritty, we can talk about why this area was up for being a project. Why did it need to be redesigned? And there's a couple different reasons. Just for some wayfinding, if you're familiar with the garden, the upper wildflower bed is as you're walking out of Woodland Walk and facing what we call Valley View. It's just on your left, and the pond is on your left. It's in a very central area of the garden. And if you've seen it, if you know it, it is very densely planted. I think that's one of the first things you notice. And it has a mix of both herbaceous and woody plants. But a lot of these herbaceous plants were not quite the right choice. They're very aggressive and very tall, so that not only overtook the other herbaceous plants in the bed, but also swallowed some of the smaller woodies. And it also blocked the view down to the pond from that area, which is a really beautiful view that should be preserved. And so because of those aggressive plants, they're large size, and the large size of the footprint of the bed is very difficult to maintain. And it would end up looking a little messy and clear that it didn't have a very clear design intention. And it was right at a central area of the garden, so definitely very much in need of a revamp. And just this is kind of a funny picture. The other day we were working in there and unearthed a kalmia. It was hidden. You can kind of see a little bit of the tufts of green that were sticking out. But this is really what I'm talking about, where there's a lot of plants that in other scenarios are great, fantastic, valuable native plants, but here compromise some of the other plants in the bed, like this poor little kalmia. So the redesign is where I come in. So there's a couple goals to kind of bring this bed back to somewhere that we really would like it. And first of all, that would be addressing the issues that I just discussed. So decreasing the height of the plants in the bed to allow that view down to the pond, also reducing the footprint of the bed to reduce a maintenance burden, also including plants that aren't going to be too aggressive and difficult to control and maintain. And then Also using this as a chance to include a lot of new things. One, improving the ecological value of that bed and including a lot of things to bring in even more wildlife to the garden. Having a bloom time that picks up right where the rhodies and azaleas leave off in the spring and carrying it through to the fall. And also adding new species and cultivars to our collections here. So since I've been here, in the meantime, we've been doing a lot of transplanting. And just to give you an idea, I have a bunch of pictures here. So this bed is going to be completely restarted from scratch. And that means that plants that are left there will no longer be there. So what we're trying to do is save as many as we can, because like I said, a lot of them are very valuable plants. They're just in the wrong spot. So if you've been noticing some large holes appearing throughout the length of the bed, that's me. And that's actually a really good sign, because that means that we have a new place for these to go where they can thrive and be in a much more appropriate spot. We've had a lot of very full cartloads coming out of the bed, which I am very proud of. I'm very excited to see things happening in this area. But yeah, so the last month or so has just been transplanting things out that we can save, which has been really exciting for me because I can physically see these changes happening. One transplanting project I wanted to highlight just because I thought it was really exciting. So there were 3 specimens of Kalmia latifolia cultivar willowcrest, which is a very unique selection. And it's kind of a funny story because I remember Steve was walking me around and showing me them, like, okay, like these are going to move here. And I was like, oh yeah, okay, like no problem. And then when we got there with volunteers and started digging, it was like, oh my goodness, these are all massive. And they all ended up being huge specimens. They took 4 to 5 people to carry each root ball. And it was an exhausting day. I felt totally out of my element, and I hadn't worked with transplanting plants that large before, but it was really fun and it was really rewarding. And actually, this is a photo of where these 3 ended up in our parking lot. So they ended up in a really great spot, and I just thought they were a great example of how we're trying to take things from Upper Wildflower and save them and move them somewhere else before we try something new. But looking forward for my project, there's still a lot of work to do. It's not going to be replanted until the spring of 2023. So in the meantime, I have been working on generating a plant list. So any plant that I think might work or might suit the design criteria, or that I'm just excited about. And so over the winter, I'll be refining that and then also trying to piece together those into a cohesive design. So all things that I'm very excited about. And I feel like I've already learned so much since just arriving here in June. Feels like ages ago, but in a good way. So yeah, let me see. There's my last slide. Thank you so much. And then I will go ahead and stop sharing my screen and then introduce Jake, our next speaker. All right. I think I'm done sharing. And there's Jake. So Jake Summers graduated a semester early from high school to pursue permaculture design certificate in Oregon. He went on to attend Connecticut College, where he studied botany, ethnobotany, and French. In his junior year, Jake spent 6 months in Madagascar studying rice agriculture and natural resource management. After graduation, Jake moved to Savannah, Georgia, where he worked for Bartlett Tree Experts. Jake went from groundsman to foreman in a couple years and earned his arbor certification. After realizing commercial work was not for him, he decided to pivot to public horticulture and applied for the Jenkins Fellowship, where he is now in his 2nd year.
Thank you so much, Nikki, for that introduction. Yeah, let me just go ahead and share my screen and I can talk to you guys a bit about my fellow project today. All right. So thanks everyone for joining us. My name is Jake, and yeah, my project was the Holly Springs Legacy Garden here at Jenkins. And in the background there is the Holly Springs named Astronaut, which is one of my favorite Holly Springs hybrids with the pink stripes and sanding, they call it, and that greenish yellowish blotch. So really beautiful plants, and I'll get into these a little more. So the project was to design and install a legacy garden on Azalea Hill. So this is the site of the garden partway through. And we really wanted to start this from scratch. So there had been some plants there before, some holly springs that had been planted there, but they weren't doing so well for a few reasons. And so we sort of wanted to just take a total redesign. And so that was the project. Now, legacy garden means that it's going to include every hybrid from the Holly Springs hybrids. And I'll sort of, again, talk a little more about what that means and why that is important. Here's a map of Jenkins, and this area where the arrow is the site of my project. So this is known as Azalea Hill, and it houses mostly non-native evergreen azaleas. And so this was an opportunity to sort of expand on that existing collection. A little bit about the Holly Springs azaleas. So they were hybridized by this man here, Pete Vines, who was a azalea hybridizer. He lived in Springfield, Virginia. And they're named Holly Springs after Holly Springs, Mississippi, where he attended school at the University of Mississippi. And as I mentioned, they're evergreen azaleas, and they have a lot of variability with the bloom times. A lot of them are somewhat later blooming azaleas, blooming in later May and early June. And their bloom color as well is extremely variable, as you could see sort of from the first image. So there's a lot of really fun azaleas in this Holly Springs hybrid group, and there's over 100 of them. And so for that legacy, to have that legacy garden, we wanted to include at least one of each hybrid. So when I was discussing my project with Steve, we were sort of thinking about why we wanted to do this, because there's a lot of opportunities in a garden to do a lot of different projects. And there were a few different reasons. One was to act as a germplasm repository for all of the known Holly Springs cultivars. And if any of them were lost, they would sort of have a library here at Jenkins at the Legacy Garden to propagate them for posterity. And it builds upon Jenkins' diverse plant collection. It's already existing plant collection. It opens up a special area of the garden to visitors. This is really a new area that visitors hadn't been able to see before, and it offered some pretty unique opportunities, such as the views, and as well as functioning as an educational tool. So most of the Holly Springs, many of them anyway, were grown more in Virginia, where they were hybridized, and so this allows us to see how they do in Pennsylvania, in this deciduous forest setting in zone 7A. I believe in Virginia it was more like 7B, but it's a little different anyways. And of course to beautify the landscape for our guests. So when I was going through the design process, there were a few different variables to take into consideration, including the bloom time, the mature height of these plants, and the color. And it was really important that we wanted to spread out the bloom times throughout the garden and didn't have just one area blooming at once and then another area blooming. We wanted to sort of have the whole garden blooming. As far as the height is concerned, we didn't want the tallest plants to be close to the path. So it was important that we stratify the height to have the lower plants closer to the path and the overall higher plants further. And finally, the color. It was, we wanted to take in consideration the different colors that these azaleas would have, although they are very variable. There are some trends with them, and so we didn't want to have anything too clashing. That was also very important. So here's an image of the garden partway through planting. There's still some holly springs and pots that hadn't gone in the ground. But this was after our first major planting day. And there were a few other things to consider as well, such as the path, where the path is going. You can see it is staked out with those red flags there. There were going to be 2 benches in the garden, so I had to find placement for those benches and think about where they were going to be. And finally, signage explaining to visitors what the Holly Springs Legacy Garden is. After kind of going through a lot of those variables and thinking this through, it's time to draft a blueprint. This is one of my earlier iterations, and that is on a map of Azalea Hill. I use drafting paper to be able to see, tracing paper to be able to see the different layers. Under this layer, I have another layer that's showing the different heights, which I'll show you a little later. And each of those circles represents a Holly Springs, and the letters represent which hybrid it is. So I keyed them all out. And as I went, the design started to change a bit. As I would talk through it with Steve, we sort of changed some of the planting pockets and started to rethink some of the initial designs. And here I have a video. Let's see, oh, is it gonna work? There it goes. Okay, so here's a video of me just flipping through some of the different layers of the design and seeing the different bloom times. Let's see if this is gonna play for us here. There it goes. So that's the map. And then there is the, this is showing the different heights here. I believe there's green was the tallest, and then red was sort of like the medium height plants, then blue, the ones closest to the path, are the low ones. Ooh, oops. So that's the height. And then I'm going to show the plants themselves on the next piece of tracing paper. And finally, these next 3 are the different bloom times and colors. So making sure that they were spread out and that the colors were not clashing too much. This next one is going to be the medium bloom times, and then finally the later blooms. There they are. And this was the final design. So even after that, things changed a little bit. We realized we actually had an opportunity to get some nicer specimens, some larger Holly Springs that we could add to the project. As part of preparing for the project for the planting, I had a great chance to do some soil sampling, which I'd never done before. And we went through and raked back different areas throughout the Holly Springs garden and took some soil cores. And we mixed them up and we sent them off to a New York Soil Food Web for analysis, specifically for mycorrhizae, which means fungus root. It's sort of, these are organisms that grow with the plants that help them to succeed. And from our report, we saw that we had low endomycorrhiza, a low percentage, and that we could, we may have to add some. And that's exactly what we did. So we got, we were able to get some of this mycorrhizal landscape inoculant. And after we planted, we watered them in with a scoop of this mycorrhizae, and we're hoping that it will help these plants to establish and grow really healthy. The next step was to get the azaleas. We did have some in the garden already, but we were definitely missing a lot of the hybrids. And I had a lot of support and help from a lot of people from the Northern Virginia chapter of the Azalea Society of America, including Dave and Leslie Nanny, pictured here, who were the legacy project leads. And they drove up all those Holly Springs that you can see in pots behind them. They made a trip from Virginia and dropped those off, which was extremely generous of them. got to see the space before it was planted. In addition, Rick and Susan Bauer, also associated with that chapter, came up with a different trip and dropped off another load of plants. So, big thanks to them. Was really a big help and really made the project a success. And in addition, Paul and Carolyn Beck, who are also members of that chapter, donated. They actually rented us a truck here, and Steve and I drove down to Virginia 2 days before our planting, and we loaded up, just these massive holly springs. Some of them were over 30 years old with huge root balls, really beautiful, beautiful plants. And they generously donated them for this project. And, very thankful for that. It really helped making the garden look like an established, finished product. Here I am with Carolyn after loading the azaleas. So big thank you to Carolyn and Paul as well. And then we brought them back and we unloaded them. There's Steve and the Bobcat there, loading the plants from the truck. There's Nikki and me. So that was really fun to be able to get those plants, and it's kind of a new experience. And but there's still some work to do before planting. So we had a lot of plants that were growing in the Holly Springs garden, such as these large pinkster azaleas, our native rhododendron paraclimenoides. And we didn't want these to go to waste, so we ended up transplanting many of them to other areas in the garden. And we also transplanted some other azaleas out of the garden, or balled and burlap them for planting. So here's a bunch of our volunteers and staff getting ready to prep the area for planting. And after we transplanted a lot of these azaleas, we were left with the large holes where the azaleas were. So then we needed to think about filling these holes with a mix of the special azalea soil and topsoil. And so here's the site after we were clearing it and filling the holes with some more volunteers. And it's really, like I said, it was really a blank slate. So it was awesome because it really allowed me to, when making the design, I didn't really have to worry about what was already existing there. Steve was very open in letting me kind of change what was already there. And here's an image of our faithful volunteers after that day of clearing and prepping the space. We also had the opportunity to use a new piece of equipment. Bill Schwarzy generously donated this chipper to Jenkins Arboretum. We, as part of our naturalistic gardening, we often will chop up branches and sticks in the garden and leave them in place to break down. And with this chipper, it sort of just allows us to expedite that process in many ways. And it really helped out when clearing. We had some giant piles of brush and the chipper just ate through it all and made some really nice wood chips that we were able to spread around. And then we're getting ready to plant. So then it was setting out the plants and putting everything in their spots. And this is the time that, I knew that we would have to make a few changes. Things don't always turn out as you want them to in the design, but luckily things did go very smoothly, and most of the original design actually stayed the same, which was great. And then we had planting day. This was really an incredible effort by everyone who came. We had some Jenkins volunteers. We had some staff members from Tyler Arboretum come and lend a hand. And we were able to plant over 160 azaleas in about 3.5 hours. It was a huge amount of work, and it went much better than I could have ever expected. So, it was a great result, and big thank you to Tyler Arboretum for coming out and helping. And finally, just have one more video here by Sharon, our videographer who works with us. And it's a time lapse of the planting that I thought would just be kind of fun to see how it went. So give me a second. And all right, so thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. It was really a pleasure to be able to talk about my project, and you know, it was a really incredible experience for me to be able to work on something and achieve something, you know, that big. It was the first time I ever had the opportunity to do that. So now I'm going to stop sharing my screen here, and I'm going to introduce Madison. So Madison Grizzelle graduated from Denison University with a degree in biology and began her horticultural career with the Hamilton Educational Fellowship at Jenkins. She returned to Jenkins not long after her fellowship as head horticulturist to continue to care for the gardens. Currently, she's the head gardener at Elm Court, a historic mansion north of Pittsburgh that is in the process of becoming a foundation, where she leads her team in the development and growth of 20 acres. She's a passionate supporter of the fellowship program. She will be sharing her experience and how it has impacted her career. Without further ado, Madison, take it away.
All right, thank you, Jake, and thank you everyone for being here and for Jenkins for inviting me to return and share my experience. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. So let's get set up. All right, perfect. So here we are set up. Again, thanks for the introduction, Jake. My name is Madison, and I'll be presenting my presentation called Beyond the Fellowship. I was a Jenkins Arboretum and Garden Hamilton Fellow from 2014 to 2016. It was a really great way for me to jumpstart my experience in public horticulture, and it really was the beginning of my career and set me off into a great direction. I had a really unique opportunity where I returned back after the fellowship in 2017 and was the head horticulturist there for another 3 years. So part of my experience in talking about this will also include some, you know, of being a supportive staff for the fellows too. So I got to see sort of both sides and be supportive of the fellows as one and then as a fellow staff member there. But we'll go ahead and get started. So right now I'm actually, as Jake said, the head gardener at Elm Court. It's a beautiful historic mansion north of Pittsburgh. It was previously a private residence, and it is now in the process of becoming a foundation. The house is mostly used for recording for musicians, as a community resource for some groups. And it's just a beautiful space. Right now I manage a team of 4 gardeners and several subcontractors to maintain, beautify, and develop 20 acres of garden space. It's a really great fit for me, and but enough about this. Let's talk about how I got here and sort of the process of my career development so far. Starting with the Hamilton Educational Fellowship. So after graduating college in 2014, I decided I needed to get involved with public horticulture. I had taken several classes in plant identification, taxonomy, ecology. I was just found this love for plants sort of later on in my college experience. And I needed that actual hands-on immersive education and just hands-on experience. So the fellowship was something that I found through some networking with professors and other public garden professionals. And it was a great fit. You know, it was something I had never held a shovel in my life before I got there, but I had this open mind for learning new things and just a great passion for learning. And the fellowship provides a lot of that. So I had several expectations for what I would learn based off of interviews with in the process of being selected for the fellowship, and, you know, just job responsibilities. There's things that you know you're going to be able to do in that process. So I thought, you know, I'm going to learn about plant identification, care and maintenance of gardens. Like when do you do certain things in the gardens? I had no idea when I got there. Design basics, how to deal with pests and that process, and even just the basics of public garden management. What does it mean to run a garden successfully and have folks there to enjoy it as well? So that's sort of what I went into the experience thinking I would learn and gain experience in, but I really gained a lot more. There were several things that were just sort of added along the way, or things that I didn't even know were possible in this process. But I added a lot of skills like public speaking, doing the lunchtime talks, leading tours, creating educational programming, and being able to present that to the public, were things that I just found, you know, really clicked with me. I had this passion for plants and sharing it with people. I wanted to, you know, spread the word about gardening and get more people involved with it. I learned a lot about project management and leadership. The Hamilton Educational Fellow Project is a really big deal. It's this project that, as you could hear from both Nikki and Jake, you know, you get to have full ownership of this project. You're being supported by all of the staff there that's helping you along the way. But early on in your career, to have an opportunity to sort of go from start to finish and be the person in charge of staying on track with timelines, getting things organized, and actually even just getting that many people to come on one day and plant that many azaleas, you know, it's a big process. And being able to do that, and then after the fact, be able to talk about that, is a huge thing to bring into your future career. And as you go to other job interviews and explain that you can do that, is a huge, huge thing to be able to add to your resume. I worked with a little bit of grant writing and getting that sort of financial experience into development and membership. I was really curious about how do nonprofits work? How do these beautiful gardens like Jenkins, you know, or how are they sustained by members and donations? So I wanted to gain some interest in that while I was there, as well as networking. There's a huge horticultural world out there that I just needed to get plugged into and meet the right people. And then we had experiential learning on field trips. When I was a fellow, we would go almost like once a season. We would head out, and it could have been visiting another garden or even just going on a hike out in the woods. But these moments of being out in the field with your peers, with your supervisors, were just opportunities to, you know, showcase what you've learned, point out plants along the way, and learn from each other while seeing other gardens and designs and new plants that you wanted to go home and research later. So there was so much more to the fellowship than what I expected going into it. And we have this saying that we kind of created, I feel like, while I was there as head horticulturist, that the fellowship is what you make of it. You could, just like any job, you come in, you do your responsibilities, your day-to-day duties, which everyone has the same ones, but everyone's experience is totally different, and it's really what you make of it. You get to discover your own skills and passions in this extraordinary setting of being in the gardens. And everybody's experience is totally different, whether it's your projects or how you get involved while you're there as a fellow. I have a photo of this really beautiful flow hive because when I pulled up to the Browning residence for the very first time to move in, I remember looking up onto the Browning hillside and seeing just the apiary, the beehives there, and being completely intrigued and interested and curious to learn more about beekeeping. And during the fellowship, the Arboretum supported me by helping me get a mentor to teach me beekeeping. And then I came back as head horticulturist and was able to take over in charge of the beekeeping at the Arboretum, and even get this really neat flow hive for us to incorporate. And now I'll always have bees as a part of my life. And that's sort of thanks to discovery during the fellowship. My project was the Browning Hillside Reforestation and Management. This is an area that connects the conservation woodlands and the Arboretum proper. It was, full of invasives, and then it had been turned into a mowed lawn. And then we wanted to create a forested corridor there, which was a great project. Lots of native trees put into the design. Once we installed it, then we realized that this small team of 3 couldn't actually be able to maintain it to the best of our ability. So we needed to add another layer, which was the management side of it. So I researched aggressive native pollinator plants that we could plant beneath the woody plants so that we could have them spread and suppress weeds and create a beautiful meadow while the larger plants grew. And it turned into a pollinator meadow that we all loved and cherished. And and I found one of my favorite plant genus, the Pycnanthemum mountain mints. So I started a collection of those, but it was just a great example of how you start with a project with one idea of it being perfect, but it really wasn't. And I learned through the process, and the project morphed and developed and will continue to change, just like all gardens. But it was a great experience to be able to go from start to finish for the Browning Hillside. Here's some photos of that process. We had to plant thousands of plants on this hillside to fill the space. And so we found smart ways to use like a bulb auger on a drill to plant faster and get supplies to a little bit further out spot. But that was all part of that process and figuring everything out and being able to then speak about the project after finishing my fellowship. Here's just a few photos up there. It's a beautiful spot. It'll always continue to change, but I think there's definitely beauty all through that hillside. At the Arboretum, you get to learn a lot of different garden management styles, which I really found valuable. You have the more formal gardens that are highly edited and maintained near the visitor center, where it's very detailed oriented maintenance of gardens. That's great skill to learn and to understand that style of gardening. And then there's other areas of the Arboretum that we worked, like this photo on the right is on Devon State Road, where I spent several days just removing invasives and continuing to clear the space. And then eventually we got to the point where we could plant. But we maintained that area on the side of Devon State Road very differently than, say the Wildflower Gardens right near the visitor center. But having the opportunity to understand the process of maintaining different areas, what tools, what methods, and the goals that we were trying to achieve in different areas is something that I'm thankful for, that varied experience at the Arboretum. It wasn't just every day is the same thing, weeding in the same spot. You really got a varied horticultural experience, hiking out into the woods to maintain invasives versus editing small weeds right outside the visitor center. All the field trips that we did were a great way to sort of test your knowledge. It was applying what you had learned or what you were seeing in the garden, but in a different setting. It's different IDing a plant out in the wild than it is in the same spot where it is in the garden. It kind of tests your skills. So I found that as a great way to share my knowledge and also learn a lot while doing it. These photos are from the use of what you could do with some of your educational funds. This is the Smoky Mountain Wildflower Pilgrimage, which is an unbelievable experience to hike through the Smoky Mountains down in Tennessee and be able to see all of these wildflowers that we're working so hard to maintain and grow and design with at the Arboretum, just growing fearlessly through the wild. but being with other professionals out there, learning new things about plants, and then, being able to spot some really neat things like this trillium that was really had all four of everything. So I called it a quadrillium, but it was fun to, test your knowledge out in the wild and use those funds to travel and see a little bit more of the world out there with your educational funds. Again, location was so important. Having not been from Philadelphia, I grew up in Pittsburgh and went to school in Ohio. I found out that Philadelphia was America's garden capital. It's this supremely rich horticultural area with over 30 gardens in 30 miles, which, lent itself great for these field trips and opportunities. But even in my free time, I used, weekends and evenings to go walk around other gardens and experience all these beautiful places and to just see different ways that you can run a garden. They're all very different and unique in their own way. And that added to my experience to be able to, there's no other place in the world that you can visit 30 gardens in 30 miles. And so it's really a unique place to be able to spend this time in your fellowship. You really work on your interpersonal and public speaking skills. I lend a lot of those skills that I have now to the years at Jenkins. You spent time working with different garden societies or plant groups, like the Rhododendron Society, and you're always a representation of the Arboretum, and learning to work with these folks and network and learn from them and also promote yourself and what you're doing was something I learned while being a fellow there. And then there's all of the tours and classes, which was something I realized that I loved doing. I loved being able to share my passion, share what I had learned. I feel like it's in almost all gardeners to share their tips and tricks and what they've learned. And that sort of just came naturally, especially as I'd talk about the things that I loved at the Arboretum, and to be able to be confident in those skills and, test your knowledge. If you know something really well in and out, backwards and forwards, you'll be able to talk about it and share it really easily. And that's something that working at the Arboretum really helped to teach me. That led itself to my first paid lecture opportunity. I ended up being a part of the Chester County Beekeepers Association. I would go to their meetings and learn from them, ask a million questions. I was this new beekeeper trying to figure out how to do this whole beekeeping thing. And while doing that, the folks there learned about me and how I was this gardener obsessed with providing pollinator resources. And they ended up inviting me to do a paid lecture for their group and teach them everything I could about pollinator plants. But that opportunity didn't come about because I was just sitting at home. I was learning to network. The Arboretum had me teaching, lunchtime talks to our visitors and our volunteers. And that really helped, me feel the confidence to do my first paid lecture opportunity that has, continued on for various garden clubs or other opportunities as well. The fellowship is really unique. You are in this community. You get to live at the Arboretum, which is something that, a lot of people, I think, you don't realize what an amazing opportunity that is. It's almost like not the real world. You're spending this time, you don't have to worry about commuting or, paying rent or these things. That's all part of your experience that's taken away. So I took that time that I was saving by not driving commute or sitting in traffic to really learn the plants and spend the time reading books, taking walks in the evening, and just getting to know the garden even more. So you get this immersive experience of living, breathing, seeing the gardens in all these seasons, and then repeating that in a future year. And it's also creative. Even in the winters, we got to make the giant wreath, which was just another way to use your creative mind in the design process and exercise that, which was something that at first you may not think of. You may be getting bogged down with learning all of these plants and just memorizing them and how to, recognize and ID them. But it's also important to practice that creativity and design. And we did that in lots of different ways in the fellowship. there's also a lot of peer-to-peer education. As the fellows, it doesn't always work out, but a lot of times there's one fellow that's been there for a year and a new fellow, and they overlap. So you're either the fellow that's, learning and getting as much knowledge as you can from the other fellow and the head horticulturist, or you may be a second year fellow where you're learning the skills of helping train your peer that you want to get up to speed as quick as possible, but also teaching them what you've learned. So you gain this skill of being able to help train new folks and share your knowledge. It's an important skill to have going into the future. I continue to do that as head horticulturist, training those incoming fellows, but it also led to a lot of networking. Working at the garden, I met a group called Women in Horticulture, which is this great group of women in the Philadelphia area that are there to create low or no cost professional development programs to help support each other. And this group really helped me gain more confidence in my field. I had gone to several of their events, and then they had actually asked me to become a volunteer board member for them and help out with communications and graphic design as they went through the process of becoming a 501c3 nonprofit. So that was a great experience to learn another side of that public garden management, of understanding how a nonprofit functions. My first post-fellowship position was the development coordinator at Tyler Arboretum. And now that's kind of different from horticulture and what I was doing every day there. But one of the other uses of my Hamilton educational funds was taking a class through the Association of Fundraising Professionals, AFP. It was an evening class at Villanova that I took, and several local nonprofit financial folks would come in and teach us everything they knew. And this was that portion that was missing in my understanding of public garden management, of how do these nonprofits work? And I spent those evenings learning a lot and networking with folks. And honestly, I believe it's due a large part in the fact to that class that I used my educational funds, that I was able to get this next experience and work at Tyler in their development office. So I helped with lots of different events and membership programs. This was their new barn opening. It was a really great event. And I learned a lot. I loved being a part of that team there and helping to fundraise and work in grant reporting and get other people excited about supporting gardens, because I'd grown to love them. I had this passion that I could share with folks to help them see the need for financial support. And after working there for almost a year, I had great experiences, but there was something a little bit missing. I think I was itching to get back out in the gardens. While I was still young and full of energy and excitement for gardening, I really needed to head back outside. So I had the opportunity to be the head horticulturist at the Arboretum, which really excited me to come back to this beautiful garden that really grew me as a gardener, to help grow the future gardeners. So I was there supporting fellows as they came in and out, working with Steve to help build this fellowship program. We were always trying to think of the best ways to build it so that everyone had a better experience each year. How could we add something new and make it more robust? And I really, truly enjoyed it. The difficult part of being a head horticulturist there was you were always training. You always had someone new on the team as those fellows rotated in and out. So again, this sort of became a theme in my life of things that I loved growing great gardeners. Ever since sharing my love in tours and teaching other fellows, I really started to do that a lot more as the head horticulturist, because we trained new fellows, new interns almost every year as the staff rotated through. And it was, an unbelievable opportunity to continue my Browning Hillside projects, jumping back in, collecting more of those Pycnanthemum species, and continuing on. It's a unique opportunity, but wouldn't have been possible without those years as a fellow. Then life changes, and my husband and I had the opportunity to move back home to Pittsburgh. Being from Pittsburgh and all my family in the area, we had been excited to be able to, start something new in our career and continue to grow. So we moved home and I did something even more different. I wasn't at a desk again, but I wasn't outside in the garden. I was somewhere in between. I started working as the education and events coordinator at Bedner's Farm and Greenhouse, which is a retail nursery and greenhouse and farm. So this opportunity was totally different, but in the same way, a little bit of what I've always been doing, of training great gardeners. So I used my skills and my knowledge of being able to do public speaking and share my creativity and plant knowledge by creating all these different classes to teach folks about, the native plants they could add to their garden, or creating lots of wreath workshops and sharing my skills of making wreaths with the community here. And it was a great opportunity to continue using those skills of public speaking, or even just, sometimes folks would just be out there and explaining this troublesome spot in their garden and how they needed help finding a plant, and being able to apply all those plant identification skills and plant knowledge and go out and help them find a few plants that they could put into that troublesome spot was really a lot of fun, and a great opportunity to experience a different side of public horticulture. It was interacting with the plants and the people every day, not in a garden, but in this intermediary section as a retail nursery greenhouse. And then another opportunity came around and I couldn't pass it up. The Elm Court opportunity is something that is almost a perfect combination of a lot of things in my past. It is a beautiful Pennsylvania woodland garden, which has almost become somewhat of a theme, where you could take a photo of certain spots there and it could almost be Jenkins if you looked, didn't look too close. But I think there's something about those Pennsylvania woodlands with deciduous oak trees and herbaceous plants and evergreens that will always be a part of my gardening experience now that I've grown up in a garden like Jenkins. So there's beautiful spaces like that. There are lots of containers and areas near the house that are high activity and folks are coming in and out, so that there's an application of that creative side, and incorporating what I learned at the greenhouses of using annuals and other plants to create containers. And with events happening inside the house, I've had to push myself a little bit. But again, things change and gardeners grow. So I've started to learn a bit more about cut flowers to be able to fill the house with beautiful vases of plants for events and visitors. On the left is one of the dahlias I just grew this year. I ended up submitting it to a new plant society that I joined here, the Dahlia Society, and won a couple of blue ribbons this year. So that was a lot of fun. But overall, the big picture at Elm Court is I am developing now an internship program. So this summer we had 2 interns from local universities that came for a couple weeks this summer to really learn intensive gardening and how to identify plants and care for them. It's not quite as big as the fellowship program, it's just a summer internship, but it's my way of being able to engage the community and help grow some gardeners here in a way that they can learn some of the beauty of gardening while working outside. So it's been really fun to start building these things with the building blocks that I learned at Jenkins. So some of the fellowship takeaways that I would say, are my big summary points is that this is an immersive horticultural experience. You're outside every day, you learn to, roll with the different weather and be able to find the joy and the beauty in those days. But, seeing a garden every day really changes your experience of it, and being able to live there and work there is an unbelievable thing, and you can really make the most of that. And you build these professional skills. You're adding these skills that you can add to your resume and say that you've done project management, and really to be able to put solid things onto your resume is a unique opportunity. And you start to network. You build this network of people. I've mentioned several organizations that I became a part of while I was a fellow there that really changed everything. Was being able to ask people questions, and that led to future positions, future jobs, future, whether it was a paid lecture or, another job. It's the horticultural world is small. And so the best way to do it is to start meeting people and spreading the world. It's also a creative learning environment. So like I said, you get to learn with everyone there to support you. I feel like the staff at Jenkins is just excited always to have a new fellow, to be able to share what they know and help them grow. So it's a supportive place where, I showed up not having ever used a shovel before or anything, but left with full experience and knowledge and how to use those things. And I'm now managing a team of 4 to run a garden here in Pittsburgh. So, if any of this has sounded interesting to you, for all you folks that are maybe interested applicants or students, I would say continue the conversation. I think it's really important for folks to, talk to Steve, to make those conversations, ask us these questions once we finish up here, so that you can continue learning about the fellowship and then apply. It's a unique opportunity. And like I said, every fellow has a different experience. What each person does depends on what they're interested in and how they're discovering their passions and just what skills they want to add, how they want to use those funds, where they want to spend their time, and how they want to use that to make their fellowship experience their own. And so with that, I just want to say thank you to everyone for tuning in to sort of hear my process of my career and how it's been really strongly influenced by my time at the fellowship. I'll be forever grateful for the fellowship and my time there at the Arboretum. So it's so great to be able to share that with all of you. And I wish everyone the best in searching for their next step. So hopefully you've enjoyed hearing about mine. So thank you, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen here.
Great. Thank you so much, Madison, and for Jake and Nikki and Steve, if we can resurrect you from the dark black black abyss that we've all been hiding in. Wonderful. Well, this was really awesome. I think having Steve as well, but the 3 Nikki, Jake, and Madison sharing your experiences, I think it shows the similarities, but also the differences and what you can make of it and make it your own. So I see one question has popped up. And in the meantime, when Madison was mentioning about applying, I actually, in the chat, if you check it out, I actually put the link for the webpage for the fellowship. And that's where you can go to get more information. We've updated that website, that webpage to have deadline information and the actual application form that you can click on and check out. So I would encourage everyone to do so if you did, things did resonate with you and you're interested in applying. So now we're going to do question and answer. So please feel free, again, in your Zoom toolbar, there is the Q&A. If you can type questions in there, that would be awesome. And I will be moderating and being able to ask people the questions as we go along. So we have one question that came in, and I hope some others will as well, but what other types of jobs have former fellows gone on to have? Steve, maybe I'll start with you. You might have some intel on that.
Yeah, so it's quite varied. I would say maybe a third of the folks who come out of the fellowship program go back to school. There have been a few that have gone on to study landscape architecture. And I honestly don't know where they've ended up now. I know that they're working in horticulture now, but I don't know where. I know that one of our recent ones is running the urban forestry program at the University of Delaware. There was one that actually, while he was a fellow here, he took a teaching position at Philadelphia University, and he was teaching about plants and horticulture and so on. And then he continued with that, and now he manages one of the houses in Fairmount Park and the landscape there. One of them is who just got promoted to senior horticulturist at Lewis Ginter.
I know someone's working in restoration ecology, working with sort of a commercial business and helping to restore those ecosystems and landscapes. So that's an interesting sort of different commercial side of things, but same ideas.
Wonderful. Anything else to share on that note, or we'll move on to the next, which was great, Madison. Thank you for including parts of this in your presentation. And maybe Steve, you can chat a little bit about this too. The question is, how many spots are available each year? So maybe clarifying kind of what that cycle looks like for us.
So typically it's one. Yeah, there's just one position open every year. And Madison mentioned that there's usually like a senior fellow that's been there for 1 year and then a new fellow that comes on. So that is the way we like it to operate. There have been a few times over the years where a fellow stays for just 1 year. And so then you have 2 new fellows coming in at the same time. But typically it's just one.
Great. And with that in mind, the new fellow coming in, we have a question that came in about how flexible the start date is, since this person would be graduating in May.
It's always really flexible. I think Nicki started in June, early June. Jake,
Right.
though, started in April. So we're very flexible. I think the limiting factor for us is the housing. So, there are 2 housing units for the fellows, and it just worked out this time that when Jake started, there was a housing unit available, but that's not always going to be the case. But usually the fellows end in the middle of May. So then there's a couple of weeks before the new fellow starts.
Mm-hmm. Great. So one question that I had thought about was, it seems like Jake's project was a little bit more of a conversation between the fellow and you, Steve. And then Nikki's project seemed like it was something that, was on the agenda for Jenkins as a project that wanted to happen, and that was kind of proposed out to her. So maybe you guys can chat a little bit about the process for fellows projects and maybe how much freedom there is in choosing the projects or collaboration with the staff.
So the way I have approached it historically was that I would have a list of options. I have these ideas. There are things that I would like to see happen in the garden, but none of them were time sensitive. They could happen at any time. And they were usually quite varied. So I would take that new fellow out, show them the space that I had in mind, talk through kind of what that fellow would entail or what that project would entail, and then take them to the next spot and do the same thing, take them to the next spot, and then give that fellow the opportunity to choose which of those 3 areas that they wanted. And actually, when Jake came as a fellow, we did that. We looked at several different opportunities, and he chose the Holly Springs project. But in recent years, we've been going through a site master planning process. And throughout that process, Madison, who was head horticulturist at the time, and I walked through the garden and just looked at the garden as a whole and talked about what really needed to happen and, to make the garden better. And so we started writing down those things, and we started doing those things. We actually, just as staff, started taking care of some of that stuff. But then there were some bigger things that we said, this would be a perfect fellow project. So we added it to a list. And I have this sort of running list of projects that I think would be perfect as a fellow project. And the upper wildflower bed was a glaring area that needed improvement. And, we had taken care of some of these other things. And I'm like, we really need to get on this now. Mm-hmm. And so when we were accepting applications for the fellowship, I had that in the back of my mind the whole time. When I was looking at the 25 applicants, I'm like, does it seem like this person would be the right fit? Did they mention anything about wanting to learn about native plants or pollinator gardens or anything like that? So that definitely did affect, the decision-making process.
Okay, great. And Steve, you mentioned the educational stipend in your piece of the symposium today. And then Madison, you actually shared what you did with your educational stipend. Jake and Nikki, can you talk a little bit about the educational stipend for you guys and what your plans are or what you've done with it so far?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've definitely gotten a bunch of books from it, stuff that I'm really interested in, subjects I want to learn more about. I also used it to take a course, a tree risk assessment qualification course, which was a pretty large course, and that included travel expenses and staying. It was in Ohio, so I had to travel and stay there for a few nights, and so that was an incredible opportunity to be able to get that certification, which I probably wouldn't have without that educational stipend. So that was definitely one of the larger things that I did. And actually I have another, something else coming up. There's a community forestry conference in Louisville, Kentucky, happening actually is it next week? It's coming up mid-November. So that is a multi-day conference as well. And so, it's just been so great to have these educational funds to be able to pursue educational opportunities that I would not have been able to. So those are some of the things that I've used my funds for.
That's great. Nikki, how about you?
I really haven't taken advantage of them that much. I feel like I've just been so busy. I've been napping and not thinking about it. But I actually did, like, right when I started, I got to jump in on a 5-part design course on naturalistic design. So that gave me a lot of inspiration for my project, and it was really great. I really enjoyed that. And then since then, I've really just been making a list of books that I want to get. So that's definitely on my mind. The Wildflower pilgrimage also very much at the top of my list. But yeah, right now I'm just kind of brainstorming different ways I want to use my funds, which is fun. It's great to have a wallet for that. So
Yeah, great. Let's see. Anyone else from our audience who's still with us? Does anyone have any other questions? We'll let those roll in. I am going to ask the group, and I'm kind of the odd man out today as not having been a fellow or I'm not a current fellow. So I'm going to pose this to the rest of you. What is the most unexpected thing that you learned during your fellowship? Let's see who gets to go first. Do you want me to say? Ooh, Madison unmuted. There we go.
I think something that was really unexpected, but is actually a very valuable thing to learn was I learned a lot about the care and maintenance of small engines and equipment maintenance and tool repair and all of those things. Again, whether you're working in horticulture or, near gardening at any point, or even just a homeowner in the future, it's really valuable to be able to know how to sharpen mower blades or, do things like that, being at the Arboretum and being a full-time horticulturist there in the fellowship program, there's lots of things that have to get done in winter. Folks have always asked, what do you do in the winter? And it's like, there's a list that's pages long of things that you have to, sharpen your pruners and clean and, take care of all of the tools for digging. And I think that was something I didn't expect to learn, but it's sort of a total necessary thing. And many people out in the world don't know how to do that. And I find myself teaching neighbors or folks about those kinds of things that are just helpful knowledge and life skills to have. So
that's great.
Yeah, I would say probably the most unexpected thing that I learned, I came in expecting to learn about plants and, native plants and things like that. But I think it was my second week or something, I started seeing mushrooms popping up, and it was never a big interest of mine. I always thought they were cool, but over the past year and a half, I've learned so much about fungi and mushrooms, even giving a couple of those lunchtime talks. About them. So that was definitely an unexpected component. And that's kind of just goes to show that it really is what you make of it. And if there is something you're interested in, there's a lot of opportunity to learn about that topic. So it really is up to you. And that was something that I didn't come into the fellowship anticipating learning about it all. And, I really have learned a lot. Actually, that reminds me, I also used some educational funds to go to a mushroom foray, which was a multi-day event as well up in Connecticut. And we, every day we'd go out into the woods, kind of splitting up into these different parks and foraging mushrooms, then bring them back and identifying them. So, it really is very varied in like what you can use these for and what piques your interest.
Mhm. Wonderful.
So if I can jump in, I would say that there are two things that I experienced as a fellow, and then talk about all the time now as new fellows come in, that you end up leaving the fellowship with, and that's an understanding of perseverance and resourcefulness. Working in horticulture is very rewarding, but it's not always fun. It's hot, it's rainy sometimes, you're sweating, there are bugs, you're freezing, you're shoveling snow. I mean, it seems like it's always something. And if it wasn't for the reward in the end, I don't know that people would stick with it. It is such a rewarding profession that you can do something like Jake's project, that was done in basically one day. It went from bare ground to this huge planting in essentially one day. And to be able to stand there and see it as bare ground to a fully planted garden is very rewarding. But I can tell you, there were many pounds of sweat dripped in doing that planting and all the transplanting, and just the hours of designing and talking and communicating, with other people, other organizations. So yeah, I mean, kind of getting through just the day-to-day grind. It's a tough profession. And then the resourcefulness comes in, probably everywhere, but here at Jenkins especially. I mean, we've always been a very small garden, with not a lot of resources. We're very frugal in many ways, and we kind of figure things out as we go. And there's always a challenge. I mean, everybody's going to be faced with challenges, and maybe other places that have bigger staffs, bigger budgets, they might have the right tool to do the thing that they need to do. And here we kind of create the right tool. We make it work. We do things that work. And I guess one example that's popping up into my head is we had to mulch with wood chips, a couple of very large areas. And I think we actually started out by filling buckets with wood chips and then taking the wood chips out and dumping the buckets and raking them out and going back and forth. And then we thought, well, wait a minute, we have a bobcat. Let's use the bobcat to dump the chips into the buckets. So that saved us some energy and time. So we took the buckets out and we dumped them, and we're like, well, wait a minute, we're putting the buckets in the back of the golf cart, and the golf cart has the ability to dump. So then we started putting the wood chips just in the back of the golf cart and then dumping it. And then I thought, well, wait a minute, what if we put sides on the golf carts? So you have a much deeper, bed to fill up. And so then we did that. And it's really fun for me. It's like a puzzle to like always be figuring out how to do things and how to do them quicker and easier and more efficiently. How can we get the most amount of work done with the few people that we have, and really try to make it easier, to make our lives easier. So I think resourcefulness is definitely one of those things that you learn working at Jenkins.
All right, I guess I can round things out. Yeah, I guess in my experience so far, the most unexpected thing, which I guess I should have expected, but just how easy it is to get into new things. Like I remember, I think it was my first day here, I saw we had the bees, and I was like, oh, the bees are so cool. Like I'd love to try it out. And I had expressed that at previous jobs before, but then never really got the invitation to actually participate. And then it was, I think my first day was a Monday. I said bees are cool, and by Friday I was in a full suit looking at the frames. So that was just like a really cool thing to experience, and to just like really feel that sense of like, okay, like I'm gonna get to try new things here, even if I just like say it in passing one time. So that was really, really great and really unexpected in a good way.
That's wonderful. And I think Steve might have had that picture in his presentation. Thumbs up in your full head to toe suit. So
Like, always
wonderful. Yeah, exactly. Always the thumbs up. All right. So my wonderful panel, is there anything else you guys want to share about the fellowship before we say goodbye to our group today? Any other little tidbits to share? So again, if you out there are a prospective applicant, you can check out our webpage and learn all about the fellowship and learn a little bit more about the application process. And again, that deadline has been set to February 1st of 2022. So hopefully we'll see your name on one of those applications. And if you're not a prospective applicant, thank you so much for supporting the program and our panelists today and being here with us. We hope you learned something and took something away from you. And we're so looking forward to Nikki's project coming online. And Jake, you've just done a tremendous amount of work. So much digging between the two of you. So, all right. So thank you everyone again for joining us. And we'll hopefully see you at some point soon at Jenkins. All right. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you.